This property is illegally occupied. This woman just marched onto my property and started screaming at me like I'm a criminal. She's waving papers demanding I pay fines, claiming she's some HOA president. The problem? I researched this farmhouse for months, specifically because it's not in any HOA. I've got legal documents proving she's wrong, but she won't listen. She just keeps getting louder, more aggressive, more unhinged. When I try to show her my paperwork, she completely loses it. What happens next? Well, let's just say this entitled neighbor picked the absolute worst person to mess with. Comment if you've ever wanted to put an entitled neighbor in their place. Look, I'm Ethan, and I've been dreaming about this exact moment for 3 years. Moving boxes scattered across my front yard, September sunshine warming my face, and finally owning a piece of property where nobody can tell me what color to paint my mailbox or how tall my grass can grow. I specifically chose this 1,800 feet farmhouse because every single document, survey, and legal opinion confirmed it sits outside any homeowner association jurisdiction. I'm talking county records, title insurance, 3 different real estate attorneys, and even the original 1870s land grant. This place has been gloriously HOA free since before HOAs even existed. So when this woman marches across my lawn like she owns the place, clipboard in one hand and manila folder in the other, my first thought is simple curiosity. Maybe she's a neighbor welcoming me to the area. Maybe she's got something neighborly to offer. What I'm definitely not expecting is for her to stop 3 feet from my moving truck and announce herself like she's serving a warrant. Sir, I'm Laura Mitchell, president of Maplewood Heights HOA. This property requires immediate compliance with community standards. Her voice has that particular tone that screams, I've practiced this speech in the mirror. And she's standing with her shoulders squared like a drill sergeant addressing new recruits. You know what really gets me about people like this? The absolute confidence in their own authority when they've never bothered to verify if that authority actually exists. I appreciate good record keeping, so my first instinct is to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there is some genuine confusion here. Maybe boundary lines changed. Maybe there was some recent annexation I missed during my research. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this farmhouse is outside your HOA boundaries. I have comprehensive documentation. I'm being polite because I'm an engineer. I believe in data, evidence, and giving people the chance to review facts before jumping to conclusions. I pull out my thick folder with property surveys, legal opinions, and county records that go back over a century. 3 attorneys confirm farmhouse independence. Here's the historical boundary documentation. But Laura's professional smile turns sharp faster than you can say property values. Your documentation is incorrect. This property has been in violation for years. She says it with such absolute certainty that for about half a second, I actually wonder if I screwed up somewhere in my research. Then my rational brain kicks back in, and I remember the literal months I spent verifying every detail about this purchase. Here's where things get interesting. Most reasonable people, when presented with official legal documentation, would at least take a look, maybe ask some clarifying questions, maybe suggest we compare notes. Laura barely glances at my evidence before dismissing it entirely. Those records are outdated. I have current HOA authority maps. She waves her manila folder like it contains state secrets. And that's when my engineering brain starts cataloging details. Her papers look professionally presented, sure, but the edges are slightly blurry, and the colors not quite matching what you'd expect from official government documents. The fonts look inconsistent, and those official-looking seals seem a little too perfect to be real. It's like looking at a really good fake ID. Impressive at first glance, but the details don't hold up under scrutiny. My wife Rachel emerges from the farmhouse at this point, probably wondering why her husband is having an intense legal discussion with a stranger in our front yard. Laura immediately shifts tactics, pivoting to social pressure like a seasoned politician trying to work a crowd. Ma'am, I'm sure you want to fit in with community standards. Non-compliance affects everyone's property values. There's something about the way she delivers this line, like she's done this speech before, like she's got the whole routine memorized down to the hand gestures. Rachel's a high school teacher which means she's got a built-in radar for people trying to manipulate her with authority they don't actually possess. She examines Laura's papers with the same skeptical expression she uses when students try to turn in obviously plagiarized homework. These look like copies. Where are the original documents? And that right there is when Laura's professional mask completely falls off. Her voice jumps about 3 octaves higher as she snaps back. Illegal questioning of HOA authority. Residents don't interrogate board decisions. I'm standing there thinking, seriously, a simple request for original documentation is now illegal questioning? What kind of authority figure gets defensive about basic verification requests? Here's the thing about the word illegal. It's got a very specific meaning. It refers to actions that violate actual laws, not someone asking to see your paperwork. But Laura's throwing it around like confetti. And I'm starting to realize this woman's relationship with legal terminology is about as solid as a house of cards in a hurricane. Real authority figures welcome verification. They don't get hostile when someone asks reasonable questions about their claims. I decide to propose a simple test, the kind of reality check that should settle this whole dispute in about 5 minutes. Let's call the county planning office together. They'll confirm property boundaries immediately. It's a perfectly reasonable suggestion. If Laura's right about my property being in her HOA, county records will back her up. If I'm right, we can clear up this misunderstanding and move on with our lives. But instead of welcoming the opportunity to prove her point, Laura goes into full panic mode. County records are irrelevant. HOA authority supersedes all other documentation. Wait, what? Does the HOA authority supersede county records? That's like saying the neighborhood book club has more legal power than the city council. I'm looking at this woman, watching her double down on claims that make absolutely no sense. And I'm starting to understand that logic isn't going to win this argument. Laura has constructed an alternate reality where homeowner associations operate above local government, where asking for documentation is a criminal offense, and where her manila folder contains more legal weight than official county surveys. As she gathers her papers with the dramatic flair of someone who thinks she's just delivered a devastating legal blow, she announces her ultimatum like she's handing down a court sentence. You have 24 hours to submit compliance paperwork or face formal enforcement. She's practically vibrating with self-righteous anger as she storms away, muttering, "Illegal, illegal," under her breath, like it's some kind of protective incantation. But here's where the universe decides to give me an early Christmas present. In her dramatic exit, she drops a piece of paper from her folder. I pick it up, expecting maybe an HA form or regulation sheet. Instead, I'm looking at a receipt from Print Palace Document Services. 20 copies, HOA boundary update, $87.50. The timestamp shows yesterday's date. Yesterday, this woman ordered custom-printed HOA boundary updates less than 24 hours ago. I'm standing in my front yard holding concrete evidence that Laura is creating her own authority documents, and suddenly everything clicks into place. Legitimate HOA presidents don't need to pay commercial print shops to create their authority paperwork. Real boundaries don't get updated overnight based on who moves into the neighborhood. But as I examine the receipt closer, I sense something troubling, though not yet fully clear. The wording looks vague, but it hints at patterns beyond my own farmhouse. I realize this might only be the beginning, and that Laura could be involved in something larger than a simple neighbor dispute. Drop a comment if you've ever dealt with someone who thought that they had authority. They didn't consider sushi, they didn't possess, because Laura is about to learn why you should never lie to an engineer. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. You know how some people say trust but verify? Well, I'm more of a verify than verify again kind of guy. That strange receipt I picked up yesterday keeps replaying in my head all night, and I can't shake the feeling that Laura's intrusion hides something far deeper than a simple misunderstanding about neighborhood authority. So, first thing this morning, while Rachel's making coffee and pretending she's not worried about our new neighborhood drama, I decide to do what any rational engineer would do. I start gathering data, because if there's one thing 20 years of engineering has taught me, it's that when something doesn't add up on the surface, there's usually a whole lot more going wrong underneath. My first call is to Maplewood Heights HOA directly. I figure if Laura Mitchell is really their president, this should be the easiest verification in the world. The office manager who answers sounds genuinely helpful, the kind of person who actually knows what they're talking about and takes pride in maintaining accurate records. I need to verify board member information for Laura Mitchell, I tell her, fully expecting to get Laura's contact details and maybe an explanation for yesterday's confusion. Instead, there's this long pause, followed by the most deflating response imaginable. Sir, we don't have anyone named Laura Mitchell on our board, current or past. Our president is Victor Chen, and our board roster is public record available on our website. She even offers to email me the official member list, which arrives in my inbox 2 minutes later, with Victor Chen's name prominently listed as president since 2021. The feeling that hits me isn't satisfaction at being right. It's this cold realization that Laura has been lying about basic, easily verifiable facts. I mean, claiming to be HOA president when the actual HOA has never heard of you. That's not a misunderstanding or a boundary dispute, that's straight up fraud. But here's what really gets my investigative instincts fired up. If she's lying about being president, what else is she lying about? How deep does this deception go? And more importantly, how many people has she already fooled? So, I do what any self-respecting engineer with internet access would do. I start digging into Laura Mitchell's digital footprint, like I'm conducting a background check for a security clearance. Her social media presence tells a story that makes my stomach turn. LinkedIn shows former assistant office manager at Hartley Insurance. And when I check the employment dates, it shows her position ended 8 months ago. 8 months. That means Laura has been unemployed for 8 months, which explains a lot about why she might be desperate enough to create fake authority positions. But here's where it gets really interesting. Her social media activity tells a timeline story that reads like a manual for fraud development. Her posts about neighborhood standards and property values started appearing about 6 months ago, right around the time someone in her situation might be getting really desperate about income. Before that, her posts were typical stuff: vacation photos, family updates, work complaints. Then suddenly, it's all about community compliance and the importance of maintaining standards. I dive deeper into her online complaint history, and what I find makes me realize Laura isn't just playing pretend HOA president. She's been running a systematic operation that would make a collections agency proud. 47 complaints were filed in the past 6 months across multiple neighborhood platforms. 47. That's almost 2 per week. And they're all about minor violations that would typically result in fines. Garden decorations, mailbox colors, fence heights, lawn maintenance, holiday displays. Basically, anything she could photograph and claim violates some made-up community standard. The complaints are professionally written, site-specific fake regulation numbers, and include photo evidence with timestamps. This is amateur hour. Laura has been putting serious effort into creating a believable enforcement operation. But the real smoking gun comes when I check financial platforms. And there it is. Multiple payments to Laura from neighbors, all labeled HOA fines. $50 to $75 each, paid by people who thought they were resolving legitimate violations. The payment descriptions are heartbreaking. Mailbox fine, sorry. Garden violation payment. Fence height. Correction fee. These are good people trying to do the right thing, paying money they probably couldn't afford to someone they trusted to have legitimate authority. What makes it worse is seeing the frequency Laura has been collecting these payments weekly, sometimes multiple times per week. We're talking about serious money here. Potentially thousands of dollars extracted from neighbors who were just trying to avoid conflict. That's when my neighbor Frank Wilson approaches during his evening walk, and I can tell from his expression that he's been waiting for someone like me to move in. "You met our neighborhood scammer?" he asks, with this mixture of relief and frustration. That tells me I'm not the first person to figure out Laura's game. Frank's in his 60s, retired military, the kind of guy who doesn't suffer fools gladly, but also doesn't like confrontation unless absolutely necessary. His posture and the way he looks up around before speaking tell me he's been wanting to have this conversation for months. "You know she's fake," I ask, and his response confirms my worst suspicions. Half the street figured it out months ago. She targets new residents who don't know the area's history. Made me pay $60 for a mailbox violation before I caught on to her game. Then Frank shows me the neighborhood group chat on his phone, and reading through the messages is like watching a crime unfold in slow motion. Laura got Mrs. Peterson for $40. Garden gnome fine. She's making money off these fake violations. Someone needs to stop her. But who wants the drama? My elderly mother paid her $80 for a holiday decoration violation before I found out Laura's not even a real HOA. She threatened legal action against the Johnsons until they paid for their fence height. The pattern becomes crystal clear. Laura has been systematically targeting neighbors with fake authority claims, collecting money for violations that don't exist from an organization she's not affiliated with. This isn't just neighborhood busybody behavior. This is organized fraud with a sophisticated profit motive. The group chat reveals something even more disturbing. Laura has been escalating her tactics over time. Early messages show small fines for minor issues, but recent entries describe threats of legal action, property liens, and forced compliance measures. She's not just stealing money, she's terrorizing people into submission. One message from last month reads, Laura told the elderly couple on Oak Street that they'd face foreclosure proceedings if they didn't pay their accumulated violations. They're on fixed income and scraped together $300 to avoid losing their house. $300 from senior citizens on fixed income for fake violations from a fake authority figure. The next morning, I drive to Print Palace with that receipt, hoping to get more details about Laura's document creation operation. The clerk behind the counter recognizes the order immediately, which tells me everything I need to know about how often Laura has been coming in. Oh yeah, she's a regular customer. Orders official-looking stuff monthly, very specific about logos and seals. Wants everything to look government quality. The clerk, a college-aged kid who clearly takes pride in his printing expertise, starts describing Laura's orders in detail. She brings her own templates on flash drives, always wants the heaviest paper stock we carry, insists on lamination for durability, and pays extra for color matching to make seals look authentic. Professional customer, very particular about quality. When I ask how long this has been going on, the timeline confirms my suspicions. Maybe 6 months. Started right after she mentioned losing her job. Always talks about her HOA responsibilities and how important it is that documents look professional for community compliance. The clerk pulls up her order history on the computer, and what I see makes my blood run cold. Laura hasn't just been ordering boundary maps. She's been creating an entire fake bureaucracy, violation notices, fine schedules, compliance forms, legal threat templates, even fake letterhead for multiple fictitious HOA committees. She orders about 200 to 300 pieces per month. The clerk explains, says the neighborhood is growing and enforcement demands are increasing. 6 months of ordering fake official documents, 6 months of filing neighborhood complaints, 6 months of collecting money from neighbors who thought they were dealing with a legitimate authority. I'm starting to understand that Laura hasn't just been playing dress-up. As an HOA president, she's been running a sophisticated fraud operation that's probably netted her thousands of dollars from people who trusted her authority claims. The clerk mentions something that makes my blood boil. She always pays cash and jokes about how official business requires official-looking paperwork. Nice lady, very concerned about neighborhood standards. Says she's trying to protect property values for everyone. The kid genuinely admires Laura's dedication to community service, completely unaware that he's been helping her rob his neighbors. Nice lady. This woman has been systematically stealing from neighbors for months, and the print shop employee thinks she's just a concerned community member. That's when I realize how good Laura is at this con. She's got the professional presentation, the official-sounding language, and just enough actual knowledge about HOA operations to fool people who don't have reason to dig deeper. Most homeowners, when confronted by someone claiming authority with professional-look documents, will pay a small fine rather than research whether the authority is legitimate. It's brilliant in a completely sociopathic way. She's exploiting the basic human tendency to trust authority figures and avoid confrontation turning normal community cooperation into a personal ATM machine. That evening, Laura calls my house, and I'm expecting another round of threats about compliance deadlines. Instead, she escalates to direct money extraction with the confidence of someone who's done this dozens of times before. Final warning. Submit compliance fee of $200 and architectural review forms within 24 hours or face legal enforcement. $200. She's not just threatening fines anymore. She's demanding immediate payment with the kind of urgency that's designed to prevent people from thinking too carefully about whether her demands make sense. Her voice has this practiced authority that probably works on most people, the tone of someone who expects to be obeyed without question. But something about her delivery feels rehearsed, like she's reading from a script she's perfected through repetition. But when I check the caller ID after hanging up, I see something that doesn't make sense and connects directly to everything I've discovered about Laura's past employment history and current financial desperation. The number is registered to Hartley Insurance Collections Department. Why would an HOA president be calling from a number registered to Hartley Insurance Department? The connection between Laura's fake HOA presidency and her old job at Hartley Insurance Collections is keeping me up all night. I mean, think about it. Someone who spent years perfecting the art of extracting money from people through intimidation and official-sounding threats suddenly finds herself unemployed and desperate for income. What's the natural next step? Create your own authority position and start collecting your own fines. It's like she took everything she learned about pressure tactics and document authentication from the insurance industry and turned it into a neighborhood extortion racket. But if I'm going to expose this operation, I need concrete evidence that goes beyond suspicious phone numbers and print palace receipts. The kind of documentation that would hold up if this escalates to legal proceedings or law enforcement involvement. So the next morning, I decided to set up what any engineer would call a controlled observation study. I installed a security camera on my property line that captures only public areas, the street, sidewalks, and anything visible from public spaces where Laura has no reasonable expectation of privacy. I'm not trying to spy on Laura's private life, but if she's conducting HOA business in plain sight, that's fair game for documentation. Rachel initially thinks I'm going overboard with the surveillance angle. But when I explain that we're potentially looking at organized fraud that's victimizing elderly neighbors, she gets on board with the investigation. She's been unemployed for 8 months, Rachel points out while reviewing Laura's social media timeline on her laptop. Unemployment benefits ended 3 months ago. She's desperate for income, and this fake HOA scheme is probably her only source of money right now. The surveillance footage from the first night is exactly what I expected to see, but somehow more disturbing than I anticipated. Around 11 p.m., Laura's home office lights up, and through her open window facing the public street, I can clearly see her at a computer and printer setup that looks more professional than most small businesses. She's not trying to hide her document creation. Why would she? From her perspective, she's just doing legitimate HOA work that requires evening hours because she's so dedicated to community standards. The footage shows her rehearsing staged violation scenes, arranging props under a magnifying lamp, and organizing them into folders designed to mimic authentic evidence packages for unsuspecting neighbors. What's interesting is the methodical nature of her operation. This isn't someone hastily throwing together fake paperwork. She's got a systematic process that suggests months of refinement and continuous improvement. Night 2 reveals the money exchange I suspected was happening all along, but seeing it in real time makes the fraud feel viscerally real in a way that payment records couldn't capture. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor who got hit with the garden gnome fine, approaches Laura's front yard around 7:00 p.m., carrying an envelope with the kind of careful, nervous movements that suggest she's been dreading this interaction. The conversation is brief and businesslike. Laura hands over official-looking documents, while Mrs. Peterson provides what's obviously a cash payment, her hands slightly shaking as she counts out the bills. What makes my stomach turn is watching Mrs. Peterson's body language throughout the exchange. She's nervous, apologetic, clearly intimidated by the whole interaction, constantly nodding and saying what appears to be yes, ma'am, and thank you, like she's grateful for the opportunity to pay money for a fake violation. This isn't someone paying a legitimate fine. This is someone being victimized by a con artist who's exploiting her trust in authority figures and her generation's respect for official looking documentation. The third night of surveillance shows Laura's outdoor document preparation operation, and I realize I've been underestimating the scope of her fraud infrastructure. She set up a laminating station on her patio table, creating what appear to be official notices with professional grade equipment that probably cost more than most people spend on home office setups. Heavy duty laminator, industrial paper cutter, color printer that produces government quality documents, and even a machine that applies official looking seals with heat and pressure. The level of detail is impressive from a technical standpoint. Waterproof lamination, color-coordinated seals, heavy paper stock that looks government-issued, even holographic elements that catch light like authentic security features. She's clearly invested significant money in making her fake documents look authentic, which suggests this operation has been profitable enough to justify equipment costs that probably total several thousand. I count her laminating at least 20 different documents over the course of 2 hours. Each one carefully inspected under good lighting and sorted into different stacks based on what appears to be violation type and neighborhood location. She's not just creating random fake paperwork. She's running a document production operation with inventory management and quality control procedures. The systematic nature of her work suggests she's processing violations for multiple neighborhoods simultaneously, which means the scope of her fraud operation is probably much larger than just our immediate area. This isn't opportunistic neighborhood harassment. This is organized crime with business planning and operational efficiency. But the smoking gun comes on day 4 when I capture Laura in the act of manufacturing evidence with the kind of premeditation that turns fraud into conspiracy. The camera shows her walking from her house to my mailbox public sidewalk, completely legal to record carrying what appears to be a violation notice and a folder containing additional documentation. She places the document in my mailbox, steps back, and then pulls out her phone to photograph the mailbox with the notice clearly visible. Adjusting angles to ensure the house number and violation notice are both clearly readable. She's literally creating photographic evidence of her own violation claims. This is beyond fraud. This is evidence tampering, manufacturing documentation to support false legal claims. The footage shows her checking the photo quality on her phone screen, taking multiple angles, including close-ups of the violation text, and even adjusting the document placement to get better lighting for maximum credibility. What's most disturbing is watching her create multiple layers of false evidence during this single visit. She photographs the violation notice in my mailbox, then removes it and photographs my property from different angles, apparently documenting the violations referenced in her fake notice. She's building a comprehensive case file that would look convincing to anyone who didn't know the violation notice was fabricated. The level of detail suggests she's done this many times before and refined her evidence creation process through experience. She even appears to be documenting the time and date by including her phone screen in some photos, creating timestamp evidence for her fake violations. Armed with this evidence, I decide to spring a trap that should expose the full scope of Laura's fabricated authority while giving her enough rope to hang herself with increasingly elaborate lies. When she calls that evening with another compliance deadline, I shift tactics completely from confrontational to cooperative. Laura, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'm willing to discuss compliance with your requirements. Can you provide the complete documentation package, including board meeting minutes that approve my specific violation? The change in my tone clearly catches her off guard. I'm no longer arguing about her authority. I'm treating her like a legitimate official and asking for standard documentation that any real HOA would readily provide. Excellent decision. She responds with obvious relief and what sounds like genuine surprise. I'll prepare comprehensive HOA materials for your review. The next morning, Laura arrives at my front door like she's delivering a legal briefing to corporate executives who might question her credentials. She's carrying a wheeled briefcase that looks expensive and professional, wearing what appears to be her most intimidating business outfit. Dark suit, serious jewelry, the kind of presentation designed to intimidate people into compliance without asking too many questions. I have comprehensive HOA records documenting 3 years of violations and enforcement actions, she announces while spreading documents across my kitchen table, like she's presenting evidence in a courtroom case she expects to win. The performance is actually quite impressive. If I didn't know she was completely fabricating everything, I might be convinced by the sheer volume and professional appearance of her documentation. Laura's fabricated evidence package is a masterpiece of fraud creativity that demonstrates significant time investment and attention to detail. She's created fake board meeting minutes that feature her signature as president alongside other fictional board members, detailed architectural review standards that cite specific regulation numbers and reference legitimate-sounding county codes, a comprehensive fine schedule ranging from $50 to $500, depending on violation severity, with escalation procedures for noncompliance, and even forged neighbor complaint letters about my property that include fake signatures and addresses. The documents reference meetings that never happened, cite regulations that don't exist, and include official-looking seals that she's obviously created herself using professional design software. What's most disturbing is how convincing it all looks. Someone without reason to dig deeper would probably accept this documentation as legitimate proof of HOA authority and never think to verify the underlying claims. The fake meeting minutes are particularly sophisticated, including detailed discussions about my property, specifically votes on enforcement actions and budget allocations for compliance monitoring. She's created an entire fictional narrative around my violations that spans multiple meetings and involves community input that supposedly influenced board decisions. The architectural review standards cite specific measurements and design requirements that sound reasonable and professionally written. Even the fine schedule includes legal disclaimers and appeals processes that mirror legitimate HOA documentation. The level of detail suggests either extensive research into real HOA operations or previous experience with legitimate community governance that she's now corrupting for personal gain. But here's where my engineering background becomes useful. I start asking the kind of verification questions that legitimate authority can easily answer. But fake authority can't handle without revealing inconsistencies. These meeting minutes show board votes on my specific violation. Can you provide contact information for other board members so I can verify the decision process? Laura's professional demeanor immediately shifts to defensive panic, her confident presentation dissolving into the kind of evasiveness that screams deception. Board member information is confidential for privacy protection. She snaps like I've just asked for state secrets instead of basic contact information that legitimate organizations readily provide. What about public HOA financial records showing where fines are deposited? I continue, knowing that legitimate organizations maintain transparent financial documentation that members can review. Internal financial matters. You're illegally demanding confidential information. There's that word again, illegal. Every time Laura feels cornered by reasonable requests for verification, she starts throwing around legal terminology like it's a magic spell that will make uncomfortable questions disappear. The pattern is becoming crystal clear. Fake authority figures rely on intimidation and official-sounding language because they can't provide actual documentation that would withstand scrutiny. Real HOA presidents would welcome verification requests because they have nothing to hide and legitimate documentation to support their claims. Fake ones get hostile and defensive because verification exposes their lies and reveals the fabricated nature of their authority. But as I watch Laura gather her fabricated documents with increasing agitation, something about her body language and prepared responses makes me wonder if this confrontation is going exactly according to her plan. I reveal my smoking gun evidence with the confidence of someone who's built an airtight case that should end this fraud immediately. Laura, I have video footage of you creating these documents and planting fake violations in mailboxes. Her response is immediate and practiced, almost like she's been rehearsing for this exact moment. Illegal surveillance, illegal harassment. I'm calling police for illegally spying on legal HOA operations. She storms out toward her car with theatrical indignation, and I watch her actually dialing 911 from the driveway with the kind of righteous anger that suggests she genuinely believes her own lies. But as the police sirens grow closer in the distance, a chilling thought hits me. Laura's reaction seems too smooth, too prepared, like she's been expecting this exact confrontation. What if Laura has been planning this confrontation all along? What would you do if someone called the cops on you for exposing their lies? Drop a comment, because this is about to get way more complicated than Ethan expected. 2 hours pass before I hear the police sirens getting closer, which is actually the standard response time for non-emergency calls in our area, giving me plenty of time to second guess everything I've done and wonder if I'm about to become the villain in my own story. I spend those 2 hours organizing all my evidence into a clear presentation: property deed surveys, legal opinions, video footage of Laura's document creation, and evidence planting, plus screenshots of her fake financial collections from neighbors that I've carefully annotated with timestamps and descriptions. Rachel helps me create a timeline that shows the progression of Laura's fraud operation. And honestly, seeing it all laid out chronologically makes the scope of her deception even more disturbing. By the time Officer Walker and Officer Stone arrive at my front door, I've got a comprehensive case file that should make their investigation straightforward. What I'm not prepared for is Laura's performance when she presents her side of the story to law enforcement. Laura approaches the officers like she's briefing corporate executives about a serious security breach, carrying her professional briefcase and wearing an expression of righteous indignation that would be convincing if you didn't know the background story of systematic fraud and staged evidence. Officers, I'm Laura Mitchell, president of Maplewood Heights HOA, and I'm reporting illegal occupation of community property combined with unauthorized surveillance of legal officials. Her delivery is so polished and confident that I can see both officers taking her seriously initially, which makes my stomach drop because I realize how easily she could have convinced them if I didn't have video evidence. She hands them a folder of documentation while explaining that I've been conducting illegal surveillance operations against legitimate community authority figures who are just trying to maintain neighborhood standards. The way she frames the situation makes me sound like some kind of neighborhood stalker with a vendetta against community leadership, rather than someone who caught her committing organized fraud. Officer Walker examines both sides of the story with the kind of professional neutrality that makes me nervous, even though I know I'm completely in the right and have comprehensive documentation to prove it. Ma'am claims you're illegally occupying HOA property and conducting unauthorized surveillance, he explains while reviewing Laura's documentation. With the careful attention that suggests he's seen these kinds of neighbor disputes before, I can see him trying to make sense of the conflicting claims. On one hand, Laura's papers look professionally prepared, and she sounds like someone with legitimate authority who's dealing with a difficult resident. On the other hand, my property documentation is clearly authentic and comprehensive, supported by multiple independent sources. I provide my evidence package systematically. Property deed with clear boundary descriptions that go back over a century. Survey maps that show my farmhouse location relative to any community boundaries. Legal opinions from 3 different attorneys confirming HOA independence. Plus, the video footage of Laura's staged evidence operation that should settle any questions about who's telling the truth. The video evidence is what shifts the officer's perspective from neutral investigation to obvious fraud recognition. And I can see the exact moment when they realize they're dealing with criminal behavior rather than a civil dispute. Officer Stone watches the footage of Laura planting fake violations in my mailbox and creating photographic evidence. And I can see his expression change from professional skepticism to genuine concern about what he's witnessing. This shows the complainant manufacturing evidence. He notes while reviewing the timestamps and angles, making notes about the premeditated nature of Laura's stage documentation. Officer Walker examines Laura's folder more carefully and starts pointing out inconsistencies in formatting, seal quality, and official language that suggest amateur creation rather than legitimate government documentation. The contrast between my authentic legal documents and Laura's obvious forgeries becomes impossible to ignore, even for someone without specialized training in document authentication. But rather than backing down when confronted with evidence of her fraud, Laura doubles down with increasingly desperate claims that reveal the depth of her delusion and her complete inability to accept reality when it contradicts her fabricated authority. Officer Stone calls Maplewood Heights HA for verification, and when he gets confirmation that Laura has never been affiliated with their organization, she explodes into accusations of conspiracy that make her sound like someone who's completely lost touch with rational thinking. Ma'am, Maplewood Heights HA confirms you're not affiliated with their organization, he explains diplomatically, probably hoping to give her a chance to back down gracefully. Laura's response is immediate and unhinged. Corrupt HOA office. They're illegally denying my presidential authority. I have legal documentation proving my position. She starts waving her papers like they're constitutional amendments, insisting that the actual HOA office is lying about her membership status and participating in some vast conspiracy to undermine her. What happens next is so outrageous that I almost can't believe I'm witnessing it in real time, even though I should have expected Laura to escalate rather than admit her lies. Laura produces another document from her briefcase, a police report that she claims to have filed about my illegal surveillance activities that supposedly proves I'm the real criminal in this situation. Officer Walker examines the document with growing confusion because the formatting doesn't match their departmental standards. The case number doesn't exist in their system, and the language sounds like it was written by someone who learned legal terminology from television shows. Ma'am, this report isn't in our system. Did you create this yourself? He asks, with the kind of careful tone you use when dealing with someone who might be experiencing a mental health crisis and could become unpredictable. Laura's response confirms that she's completely lost touch with reality. Illegal systemic conspiracy against legal authorities. You should arrest illegal residents, not harass legal officials. Watching Laura's psychological breakdown in real time is both fascinating and disturbing from an engineering perspective. It's like observing a complex system failure, where each component malfunction triggers additional failures until the entire structure collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Her illegal accusations become more frequent and less connected to actual legal concepts triggered by any challenge to her fabricated authority, regardless of how reasonable or professional the challenge might be. Officer Walker tries to de-escalate by explaining standard verification procedures that any legitimate authority figure would welcome. But Laura interprets every attempt at fact-checking as evidence of police corruption and conspiracy against her imaginary position. She's created a closed loop of delusion where any contradictory evidence proves that everyone else is wrong, rather than examining whether her own claims might be false, which makes rational conversation impossible. The officers reach their conclusion through a systematic evidence review that leaves no room for ambiguity about who's telling the truth and who's been committing systematic fraud for months. Video evidence clearly shows evidence of tampering with premeditation. Multiple agencies deny Laura's authority claims when contacted directly. Neighbors confirm fake fine collection through documented payments. My property documentation is authentic and comprehensive, verified by multiple independent sources. Laura's documents are obviously fabricated with amateur techniques that don't match legitimate government standards. The pattern of fraud is undeniable, and both officers acknowledge that they're dealing with organized deception rather than a simple neighborhood dispute or misunderstanding. Officer Stone explains that filing false police reports and impersonating authority are serious criminal offenses that could result in charges if Laura continues her fraudulent activities, giving her one last chance to back down before facing legal consequences. But even facing potential criminal consequences, Laura maintains her delusion with increasing desperation and hostility toward the officers who came to help her resolve what she claimed was a legitimate community issue: illegal threats against legal officials, illegal conspiracy by corrupt police. Real authorities will investigate illegal harassment. She's now accusing the police of being part of the conspiracy against her imaginary authority, which creates the surreal situation where law enforcement officers are being lectured about illegal behavior by someone who's been systematically committing fraud for months. Officer Walker warns Laura about the consequences of filing false reports and creating fraudulent documents, explaining that continued fraudulent activity could result in criminal charges. But she responds to every warning as if it's evidence of police corruption, rather than professional guidance about legal reality. The most disturbing aspect of this confrontation is realizing that Laura genuinely believes her own lies despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, which suggests either severe mental health issues or such a deep investment in her fraud that she can't psychologically afford to admit the truth. This isn't someone who got caught and is trying to talk their way out of trouble. This is someone whose grip on reality has become so tenuous that she can't distinguish between her fabricated authority and actual legal facts. When Officer Stone suggests that she might benefit from speaking with a counselor about her authority concerns, Laura's response is predictable, but still shocking. Illegal mental health conspiracy. Illegal evaluation. Sure, here's the text you requested. Everyone who questions legal authority is part of illegal conspiracy. Her delusion has become so comprehensive that anyone who doesn't validate her fake authority is automatically part of some vast conspiracy against her, which makes any kind of rational intervention nearly impossible. As the officers prepare to leave after warning Laura about future false reports, she makes one final desperate play that reveals just how far she's willing to escalate this situation rather than accept that her authority claims are fraudulent. Illegal warnings against legal officials. County prosecutor will investigate illegal police conspiracy. She speeds away in her car with the kind of reckless driving that suggests someone who's completely lost emotional control and might be dangerous to herself or others. Officer Walker tells me something that makes my blood run cold and keeps me worried about what Laura might do next. Document everything, people. This delusional don't usually stop escalating until they face serious consequences or get professional help. But as I watch her taillights disappear into the distance, I get a chilling thought that keeps me awake that night. If Laura is this desperate to maintain her lie, what lengths will she go to next? The call from Victor Chen comes 3 days after the police incident. And honestly, I'm expecting another round of bureaucratic complications that will somehow make this situation even more complex than it already is. Mr. Ethan, this is Victor Chen from Maplewood Heights. HO officers filed an incident report about someone impersonating our organization, and this affects our legal liability. His voice has the kind of professional concern that suggests he's dealt with fraud issues before, but probably nothing quite like Laura's elaborate operation that's been targeting multiple neighborhoods with systematic deception. Let me know if you need anything else. We need to hold a public meeting to clear our reputation and address the financial damages this impersonation has caused to community members. When he explains that neighbors have been paying money to someone claiming HOA authority, I can hear genuine anger in his voice. The kind of righteous indignation that comes from watching innocent people get victimized by someone exploiting trust in legitimate institutions. He's not just concerned about organizational liability. He's personally offended that someone would corrupt the community trust that legitimate HOAs work hard to maintain. What strikes me as brilliant about Victor's strategy is understanding Laura's psychology better than she understands it herself. Recognizing the specific delusion patterns that drive someone to maintain obvious lies in the face of overwhelming evidence, Ethan realizes Laura will attend because her delusion requires defending her authority publicly. She can't back down without admitting years of lies and fraud that would completely collapse her carefully constructed identity. She'll show up, Victor predicts, with the confidence of someone who studied organizational psychology and understands how authority obsession works. People like this can't resist the opportunity to defend their fake authority, especially in front of an audience. Her entire identity is built around this fraudulent position, so she'll see this meeting as her chance to prove everyone else wrong. The more I think about it, the more I realize Victor is absolutely right about the psychological trap we're setting. Laura has invested too much time, money, and psychological energy in her fake presidency to simply disappear when challenged. She'll see this as her opportunity for vindication, rather than the public exposure of her fraud that it actually represents. Saturday afternoon arrives with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes community gatherings feel almost pleasant, which seems ironic given that we're about to expose systematic fraud and theft that's been victimizing elderly neighbors for months. The community center meeting room setup looks official enough to handle serious business. Rectangular tables arranged in a U shape to encourage open discussion, an official Maplewood Heights HOA banner hanging behind the head table to establish legitimate authority, name placards for legitimate board members with their actual titles and tenure dates, and a sign-in sheet for residents that will create an official record of attendance. 8 households attend, which is actually a realistic turnout for this kind of emergency meeting. Those who paid Laura money, plus a few curious neighbors who want to understand what's been happening in their community and whether they might have been targeted without realizing it. The atmosphere feels tense but hopeful, like people who have been dealing with a problem individually are finally getting the chance to address it collectively with legitimate authority backing them up. Laura's grand entrance is a masterpiece of delusional performance art that would be entertaining if it weren't so disturbing to watch someone this disconnected from reality attempting to maintain control over a situation that's completely beyond their influence. She arrives in full business attire with her wheeled briefcase and what appears to be a prepared presentation folder, wearing an expression of righteous authority that suggests she genuinely believes she's about to chair this meeting and expose everyone else as frauds, conspiring against legitimate community leadership. I'm here to address illegal conspiracy against legal HA authority and protect residents from illegal property violations, she announces to the room like she's delivering a keynote speech at a conference for community leadership. Her voice carrying the kind of practiced authority that probably intimidated previous victims into compliance. Her confidence is so complete and her presentation so professional that I can see a few people looking confused about who's actually in charge here, which demonstrates how effective her fraud techniques have been in creating believable authority personas. She sets up her materials at a side table like she's preparing to make a formal presentation that will vindicate her position and prove everyone else wrong, completely oblivious to the fact that she's walked into a trap designed specifically for her psychological profile. Victor Chen's response is to demonstrate what actual authority looks like when it's backed by legitimate documentation and transparent processes that can withstand any scrutiny. He methodically displays his credentials like a prosecutor presenting evidence in a high-stakes trial, where the verdict will determine whether justice prevails or fraud continues. Original state HOA incorporation documents with official seals and signatures that can be verified through government databases. Official board member certificates with photos and terms of service that show legitimate democratic elections. Bank statements showing legitimate HOA accounts with proper financial oversight and transparent accounting practices. 5 years of meeting minutes with detailed community decisions and voting records that demonstrate consistent governance. Current member directory with every legitimate member listed alphabetically and their contact information available for verification. This woman has never been associated with Maplewood Heights HA. He states with the kind of calm authority that comes from having verifiable facts on your side and knowing that truth will eventually triumph over deception. The contrast between Victor's authentic documentation and Laura's obvious forgeries becomes impossible to ignore, even for people who aren't experts in document authentication or familiar with HOA governance procedures. Instead of retreating when faced with overwhelming evidence of her fraud, Laura attacks Victor's legitimacy with increasing desperation that reveals just how deep her delusion runs and how completely she's lost touch with objective reality. Illegal imposter, illegal fraud. Those are fake documents. I'm the real president, she shouts while waving her own fabricated paperwork like constitutional amendments that should be respected by everyone in the room. She accuses Victor of being part of the conspiracy against her authority, insisting that his legitimate documentation is somehow less authentic than her obvious forgeries created on home printing equipment. The psychological dynamics are fascinating from an engineering perspective. When faced with contradictory evidence, Laura doesn't question her own assumptions, but instead assumes everyone else must be lying, creating a closed loop of delusion that makes rational discourse impossible. It's like watching someone insist that gravity works upward while standing next to people who are clearly being pulled downward by natural forces. Completely immune to the observable reality that contradicts their fundamental beliefs about how the world operates. The community testimony round becomes a devastating catalog of Laura's systematic theft that reveals the full scope of her fraud operation across multiple households and demonstrates the real human cost of her elaborate deception. Mrs. Peterson speaks first with the kind of nervous dignity that elderly victims often display when forced to admit they've been taken advantage of. She charged me $40 for a garden gnome violation that she said violated community standards and would result in legal action if not corrected immediately. Mr. Miller follows with controlled anger that suggests he's been waiting months for this opportunity. $75 for mailbox height that she claimed needed architectural review according to updated community regulations. Frank Wilson adds his own experience with the resignation of someone who knows he should have been more suspicious. $60 for fence repainting that she said was required for neighborhood compliance and property value protection. Mrs. Foster concludes with the most expensive single violation and obvious signs of financial stress. $85 for architectural review failure that required immediate correction to avoid legal action and potential property liens. And the total theft revealed from just the meeting attendees is $260. And that's only from people who were brave enough to attend and speak publicly about being victimized by someone they trusted to have legitimate authority. Laura's response pattern to each testimony reveals her complete inability to accept reality, even when confronted with her victims face to face, demonstrating the depth of psychological investment required to maintain such elaborate fraud. Legal fines, illegal refusal to pay, illegal testimony against legal authority, she shouts after each neighbor describes being defrauded by her fake violations, treating every victim's account as evidence of conspiracy rather than examining whether her own actions might have been wrong. She maintains absolute confidence in her authority claims while simultaneously being confronted by multiple people who can testify to her fraudulent behavior with specific dates, amounts, and documentation that proves systematic deception. The pattern becomes so predictable that you can see people in the room starting to understand that they're witnessing someone who has completely lost touch with rational thinking and constructed an alternate reality where she's the victim of widespread conspiracy rather than the perpetrator of organized fraud. What's most disturbing is watching her dismiss the real financial and emotional harm she's caused to elderly neighbors who trusted her claims about legitimate authority and paid money they probably couldn't afford to someone who was systematically deceiving them. The viral moment happens almost by accident, but it perfectly captures the surreal nature of watching someone defend obvious lies with absolute conviction while surrounded by evidence of their systematic deception. Mrs. Peterson starts recording on her phone as Laura confronts Victor Chen directly, probably just wanting to document what's happening for her own records and perhaps to share with family members who might not believe such bizarre behavior without video evidence. You are all conspiring against me. I am the only true HOA president. The rest are frauds. Laura screams while pointing wildly at Victor, her voice reaching a pitch that makes everyone in the room freeze and clearly demonstrates someone who's completely lost emotional control. The 15-second clip captures everything you need to understand about this situation. A fake authority figure having a complete meltdown when confronted with actual authority, screaming nonsense at legitimate documentation while surrounded by her own victims who can testify to months of systematic fraud. Mrs. Peterson uploads it immediately with a simple caption that perfectly summarizes the absurdity. Fake HOA president versus real one. Epic meltdown. As the meeting winds down with Victor announcing legal action and full restitution for victims, I notice something that makes my stomach drop and suggests this situation might be more complex than just one woman's authority delusion. There's a figure in the back of the room who's been quietly observing this entire confrontation without participating in the discussion or identifying themselves to anyone, taking detailed notes throughout the meeting, and seeming particularly interested in the financial aspects of Laura's fraud operation rather than the community impact. When Victor makes his announcement about pursuing fraud and theft charges, this mysterious observer pulls out their phone and makes a quiet call before slipping out the back door with the kind of purposeful movement that suggests they came here for specific information. As Laura storms out, screaming illegal theft charges, county prosecutor will investigate illegal conspiracy. I realize that Mrs. Peterson's phone recording has already started uploading to social media with the caption about fake versus real HOA presidents. But the mysterious observer's behavior suggests there might be other parties interested in this case, for reasons we don't understand yet. But as the video starts spreading, I notice something in the background that makes me wonder who else has been watching this confrontation unfold. I wake up Monday morning to the sound of vehicle doors slamming outside my farmhouse, which is definitely not the peaceful country morning I was expecting after finally exposing Laura's fraud operation and thinking the drama was finally over. Through my bedroom window, I can see a local news van parked in my driveway, complete with a satellite dish and a reporter checking her makeup in the side mirror while her cameraman unloads professional equipment that suggests this is going to be more than just a quick neighborhood interest story. My phone shows 12 missed calls from numbers I don't recognize, plus text messages from neighbors asking if I've seen the video that's everywhere and warning me that reporters have been asking questions around the neighborhood. What video? The answer becomes clear when I check social media and discover that Mrs. Peterson's 15-second recording of Laura's meltdown has exploded across the internet in ways that make my engineering brain both impressed and terrified by the power of viral content distribution in the modern information age. The numbers are actually pretty remarkable from a data analysis perspective. Even though they're nowhere near the millions that major viral videos achieve with celebrity involvement or national political content, the clip tagged A Laura loses control at community meeting has reached 267,000 views in just 48 hours, which represents incredible organic growth for amateur neighborhood content that started with zero marketing budget or promotional strategy. The longer video compilation, Fake HOA, President Epic Meltdown, has accumulated 98,000 views on the main video platform, while our local community group's warning post, Exposed Laura Mitchell Fraud Warning, has been shared 347 times locally, which is actually more significant than the national numbers, because these are people in our immediate area who might have been targeted by similar fraud schemes or know someone who has been. Channel 7's local news coverage of the suburban fraud case has legitimized the story beyond social media entertainment, giving it the kind of credibility that transforms neighborhood drama into public education about fraud prevention and community protection. The reporter waiting in my driveway represents exactly the kind of attention I never wanted from this situation. But I have to admit, there's something satisfying about the story, getting wider coverage that might prevent other communities from falling victim to similar fraud schemes that exploit trust in authority figures. Your neighbor's viral video exposing fake HOA president has caught attention across the region. She explains, while her cameraman sets up equipment and checks lighting conditions for the best possible interview footage. Can you comment on suburban fraud and what homeowners should watch for? The interview questions are actually more intelligent than I expected, focused on fraud prevention, authority verification, and community protection, rather than just sensationalizing Laura's meltdown for entertainment value or trying to create additional drama where none exists. I find myself explaining the importance of verifying official claims, checking legitimate organization membership, and documenting suspicious authority figures who demand money without proper documentation or transparent oversight procedures. What makes the video so compelling for social media algorithms is the specific 15-second segment that shows Laura's dramatic pointing and shouting while Victor Chen calmly displays authentic fake HOA documentation with the kind of professional composure that real authority figures demonstrate. It's the perfect encapsulation of fake authority confronting real authority. Visual, emotional, and immediately understandable, without context or background knowledge about HOA governance structures. The dramatic contrast between Laura's hysteria and Victor's calm professionalism creates the kind of satisfying narrative that people want to share, especially in a time when everyone's frustrated with authority figures who abuse their positions for personal gain. The video works because it shows justice happening in real time with clear heroes and villains that make viewers feel like truth is actually winning for once in a world where accountability often seems absent from public discourse. But even facing viral humiliation that's made her a regional laughingstock among hundreds of thousands of viewers, Laura refuses to back down or admit her fraud, demonstrating the kind of psychological investment that makes me wonder if she's genuinely lost touch with reality or just too proud to admit defeat after months of successful deception. She appears at my property that afternoon, carrying yet another briefcase of what I assume are newly created fake documents, apparently believing she can somehow regain control of the narrative through more elaborate lies and additional fraudulent paperwork that will somehow convince people to ignore video evidence of her meltdown. Illegal viral videos, illegal privacy invasion, illegal destruction of legal authority. She shouts while marching across my lawn like she's leading a protest against social media injustice and fighting for the rights of legitimate authority figures everywhere. Her confidence is so complete despite overwhelming evidence of her fraud that I start filming on my phone. Partly for protection, and partly because I can't believe someone would continue this charade after being exposed so thoroughly to such a wide audience. Laura, 267,000 people know you're not HOA president, I tell her while recording, hoping that maybe the sheer scale of public awareness might penetrate her delusion and force her to confront the reality that her fraud has been completely exposed. Her response reveals just how deep her psychological investment runs and how completely she's constructed an alternate reality to protect her ego. Illegal people, illegal internet. County authorities will stop illegal harassment. She's now claiming that the entire internet is participating in illegal activity by sharing evidence of her fraud, which suggests either complete detachment from reality or such desperate investment in her lies that she can't psychologically afford to admit the truth without facing complete ego collapse. Watching someone maintain obvious delusions while being filmed for potential evidence creates this surreal situation where I'm simultaneously documenting fraud and witnessing what might be a mental health crisis happening in real time. The community ripple effect from Laura's viral exposure has been fascinating to observe from a sociological perspective as other neighborhoods start sharing their own stories about suspicious authority figures who target areas with unclear jurisdiction boundaries or vulnerable populations unlikely to verify official claims. The comment sections on all the viral videos have become informal networks for fraud victims to compare experiences and identify patterns that suggest Laura isn't the only person running these kinds of fake authority schemes across suburban America. Stories emerge about similar operators targeting retirement communities, new housing developments, and areas where legitimate HOA boundaries are unclear or non-existent, using professionally looked documents and intimidation tactics to extract money from residents who trust authority claims without verification. The pattern suggests an entire category of suburban fraud that's been flying under the radar because victims are embarrassed to admit they were fooled, and law enforcement treats it as civil disputes rather than criminal activity requiring prosecution. Local news investigation has expanded beyond Laura's individual case to examine the broader scope of her fraud operation, revealing financial and geographic details that make the full extent of her criminal activity clear for the first time and demonstrate the systematic nature of her deception. Bank records obtained through legal channels show that Laura collected $1,200 from 8 households in Maplewood Heights, $800 from 6 households in the adjacent Maple Grove neighborhood, and $400 from 4 households in the Oakville community, bringing her total theft to $2,400 across 3 separate neighborhoods over the course of 6 months. The money was systematically spent on printing equipment, professional laminating supplies, official-looking seals and stamps, and even a custom nameplate reading HOA President that she apparently displayed in her home office to maintain the illusion of legitimate authority, even when alone and not performing for victims. The investigation also reveals the sophisticated nature of Laura's operation, which involved researching actual HOA regulations to create believable violation categories, studying legitimate enforcement procedures to make her demands sound professional, and targeting specific demographic groups most likely to comply with authority figures without extensive verification or pushback. She focused on elderly residents who respect authority and avoid confrontation, new homeowners unfamiliar with local governance structures, and people in areas where legitimate HOA boundaries were unclear or non-existent, creating perfect conditions for fraud success. Her success rate was remarkably high because she exploited basic human tendencies to trust authority figures and avoid confrontation, turning normal community cooperation into a profitable fraud scheme that generated significant income during her unemployment period when traditional job opportunities weren't available. Financial analysis shows Laura's fraud operation was generating approximately $400 per month in fraudulent revenue, which represents significant income for someone facing unemployment and mounting bills. The systematic nature of her targeting suggests careful planning and market research to identify the most vulnerable victims and the most believable violation categories. She created fake violations that sounded reasonable and costly enough to generate significant revenue, but not so expensive that victims would seek legal counsel or extensive verification before paying. The psychological manipulation involved targeting people's fears about property values, legal consequences, and community standing, exploiting natural human desires to be good neighbors and avoid conflict with authority figures. But as the news investigation winds down, and I think we've finally seen the full scope of Laura's operation, something happens that makes me realize this story is far from over. I received an envelope slipped under my door with no return address or identifying marks, delivered sometime during the night when no one was watching my property. Inside is a single photograph that makes my blood run cold and forces me to reconsider everything I thought I understood about Laura's fraud operation and whether she was really acting alone. The image shows Laura meeting with 2 other people in what appears to be a coffee shop. All 3 of them examining documents spread across the table like they're planning some kind of coordinated operation or discussing the logistics of a larger fraud scheme. The photo is taken from a distance with professional equipment suggesting surveillance rather than casual documentation by someone who happened to be in the area. On the back, someone has written in block letters, "She's not working alone." Have you ever discovered someone's lies went way deeper than you imagined? Share your story in the comments, because Laura's secrets are about to explode. 2 weeks pass after the mysterious photo discovery, during which I spend way too much time researching fraud networks and wondering if Laura's operation was part of something larger than just one unemployed woman's desperate scheme to create income through fake authority. The photo keeps haunting me. Who took it? Why did they send it to me? And what did they know about Laura's connections that I didn't? Detective Rodriguez calls on a Tuesday morning with the kind of professional tone that suggests significant developments in the case and possibly answers to some of my questions. The video evidence and victim complaints support theft and fraud charges, he explains, while reviewing what sounds like a substantial case file that's grown considerably since our last conversation. We have enough for prosecution, and the district attorney wants to move forward given the systematic nature of the operation and the number of victims involved across multiple neighborhoods. When I ask about potential consequences, his response makes it clear that Laura's fraud has crossed from misdemeanor territory into serious criminal behavior that carries real penalties and potential connections to broader fraud investigations. Will she face serious consequences? I ask genuinely curious about how the legal system handles this kind of suburban fraud that's probably more common than anyone realizes, especially given the hints about larger networks that the mysterious photo suggested. $20,400 of theft crosses the felony threshold in our jurisdiction. Detective Rodriguez explains, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who's seen these cases before and understands their implications. Document forgery adds identity fraud charges, and impersonating a government authority is a separate criminal offense that involves federal elements. When someone claims authority they don't possess, even if she gets a plea deal, she's looking at substantial financial penalties, community service, and probation, with fraud prevention education requirements. The systematic nature of Laura's operation, combined with the multiple victims and staged evidence, has elevated this from a neighborhood dispute to a serious criminal case that requires formal prosecution and potentially opens doors to investigating broader fraud networks. The legal proceedings begin with Laura's defense attorney attempting to arrange a plea meeting that might resolve the case without trial, probably hoping to minimize the consequences for someone who's clearly lost touch with reality and might be facing additional charges if investigators discover broader connections. But even with professional legal representation and explicit advice about the seriousness of her situation, Laura arrives at the prosecutor's office with escalated paperwork that demonstrates her complete inability to accept reality, even when facing criminal charges that could result in jail time. "I'm reporting illegal conspiracy against legal HOA president," she announces to the room, like she's filing a formal complaint with higher authorities who will finally validate her imaginary position. "These people are illegally denying my federal authority." The escalation to federal authority represents a new level of delusion that suggests Laura's psychological investment in fake authority has grown rather than diminished, despite overwhelming evidence of fraud and criminal prosecution. Laura's defense attorney clearly recognizes the problem with his client's continued fabrications and attempts to intervene before she makes the situation significantly worse for herself. "Laura, please stop," he says with the kind of weary patience that suggests they've had this conversation multiple times and he's running out of strategies to help someone who refuses to accept reality. "We discussed this extensively. You're not actually HOA president. We need to focus on minimizing the legal consequences of the fraud charges you're already facing." But Laura's response reveals just how completely she's rejected any version of reality that doesn't validate her fake authority, even when that rejection will obviously result in harsher legal penalties. Legal attorney, illegal conspiracy. I have federal documentation. She's now claiming that her own defense attorney is part of the conspiracy against her imaginary authority, which creates the surreal situation where someone facing fraud charges is accusing their own legal representation of fraud while simultaneously producing new forgeries in front of prosecutors. Laura's final attempt represents the desperate escalation of someone who's psychologically incapable of admitting defeat. Even when continuing the deception will obviously make her legal situation worse and potentially expose her to additional criminal charges. Despite her attorney's explicit advice to accept responsibility and minimize consequences through cooperation, she produces what she claims is a federal HOA oversight certificate that's obviously printed at home on regular paper with mismatched fonts and recycled government-sounding phrases. She includes what she describes as a Supreme Court ruling that supposedly supports her authority, which turns out to be random text copied from online articles and formatted to look like official court documentation with fake case numbers. Her presidential authorization letter uses boilerplate templates with legal-sounding jargon that would be laughable if it weren't being presented as evidence in criminal proceedings, where additional fraud charges could result in significantly harsher penalties. The prosecutor examines these obvious forgeries with a kind of professional restraint that suggests extensive experience dealing with defendants who continue criminal behavior even during plea negotiations. Your client continues producing fraudulent documents even during plea negotiations. The prosecutor observes with remarkable diplomatic understatement, given that he's watching someone commit additional crimes while trying to resolve existing criminal charges that could already result in jail time. Laura's response is immediate and predictable, demonstrating her complete disconnect from legal reality. I illegal fraud accusations. I legal persecution of legal federal authority. She's now claiming federal protection for her imaginary authority position, which suggests either a complete psychological break from reality or such a desperate investment in her lies that she's willing to face additional criminal charges rather than admit the truth and accept a plea deal that would minimize her penalties. The situation creates this bizarre dynamic where legal professionals are trying to resolve fraud charges while the defendant actively commits additional fraud in front of prosecutors and court officers who are documenting every word for potential additional charges. The sentencing reality check comes when the prosecutor explains the actual legal consequences Laura faces if she continues refusing to accept a plea deal that would minimize her penalties and avoid the additional charges her courtroom behavior is generating. Theft charges for the $2,400 stolen from neighbors constitute a Class 4 felony in our jurisdiction, which carries potential jail time of up to 3 years and mandatory restitution requirements that must be completed before probation can end. Document forgery adds identity fraud charges that involve federal elements due to the impersonation of government authority, which could trigger federal prosecution if the case is referred to higher authorities. Impersonating official authority is a separate misdemeanor fraud charge that compounds the other penalties and demonstrates systematic criminal behavior rather than isolated incidents. The total financial obligation includes $2,400 in victim restitution plus $1,800 in court costs and administrative fees, bringing Laura's total financial penalty to $2,400, not including potential legal fees, probation costs, and additional penalties if she continues her fraudulent behavior during legal proceedings. Laura's plea hearing represents the final opportunity for her to accept reality and minimize the consequences of her systematic fraud. But her behavior in court demonstrates that delusion can persist even when facing immediate legal accountability that could result in incarceration. Judge Harrison attempts to explain the consequences of rejecting the plea deal with the kind of careful patience that suggests extensive experience dealing with defendants who have difficulty accepting reality due to mental health issues or psychological investment in criminal behavior. But Laura interrupts repeatedly with illegal accusations until the judge warns her about contempt charges that would add additional penalties to her existing legal problems and potentially result in immediate jail time. Ma'am, further outbursts will result in contempt charges, Judge Harrison explains with professional restraint while court officers prepare to intervene if necessary. Laura's response, delivered in a stage whisper that everyone in the courtroom can hear, reveals her continued rejection of legitimate authority even when facing immediate consequences. I, legal judge, I legal threats against legal federal officials. The plea acceptance finally happens when Laura's attorney manages to convince her that rejecting the deal will result in trial, conviction, and significantly harsher penalties, including potential jail time that would separate her from her home and any remaining sources of income or support. The negotiated settlement requires 200 hours of community service at a legitimate HOA office, where she'll learn about actual governance procedures and understand the difference between real and fake authority, fraud prevention, education classes that address the psychology of authority, delusion, and help her understand how her behavior affected victims. 2 years of supervised probation with regular check-ins to ensure compliance and continued reality-based thinking, and complete financial restitution to all victims, with payment plan options that acknowledge her limited income. Laura's quiet final statement during the plea acceptance suggests that legal reality might finally be penetrating her delusion. I legal plea bargain but legal advice says accept. The acknowledgement that she's following legal advice represents the first time she's recognized legitimate authority since this whole situation began. But as I leave the courthouse, thinking that justice has finally been served and Laura will face appropriate consequences for her systematic fraud, I overhear Laura's attorney on the phone with someone discussing details that make my stomach drop and confirm my worst fears about the mysterious photograph. The plea deal covers the local fraud charges, but there are questions about connections to similar operations in other states. He's saying in the kind of low voice that suggests confidential legal strategy and ongoing investigations. My client may have been part of a larger network that we're just beginning to understand. As Laura accepts her sentence and begins the process of making restitution to her victims, I realize the mysterious photograph was right about one crucial detail. Was there more to Laura's scheme than anyone realized? 6 months later, I'm sitting on my farmhouse porch with morning coffee, reading anniversary updates about Laura's accountability journey, and reflecting on how a simple property dispute evolved into a community education experience about fraud prevention. The autumn weather feels perfect for this kind of peaceful reflection. Exactly the kind of quiet morning I was hoping for when I first bought this place. Frank Wilson's latest update arrived in my email this morning with news that Laura finished her probation last month and completed all her community service requirements. Court-mandated therapy helped her understand the difference between real and imaginary authority. He writes with the kind of diplomatic language that suggests she's making genuine progress, but still has work to do. When I ask Frank how Laura's adjusting to reality, his response reveals the underlying psychology that drove her elaborate fraud operation in the first place. Better than expected, honestly. Turns out unemployment and divorce triggered serious control issues that she tried to solve by creating fake authority positions. The therapy apparently helped Laura understand that her need to control her environment through fabricated HOA authority was a response to feeling powerless in other areas of her life. She got a job as an administrative assistant at a real estate office. A real job with actual limited authority over filing systems and appointment scheduling seems to be working out well. The irony isn't lost on me that Laura's finally found legitimate work in the real estate industry, where her detailed knowledge of HOA operations might actually be useful for helping clients navigate legitimate community governance. The community changes that resulted from Laura's fraud exposure have been more positive than anyone expected when this whole situation started. Property values in our area increased 8% after Laura's removal, partly because buyers were attracted to verified governance structures and clear authority boundaries that eliminate confusion about legitimate versus fake officials. Maplewood Heights HOA created a verification website where residents can check board member credentials and contact information, making it much harder for future scammers to impersonate legitimate authority. The county established a suburban fraud reporting system that helps residents verify authority claims before paying money to people who demand compliance fees. Even local print shops now verify authority documents before printing official-looking materials, eliminating Laura's primary tool for creating convincing forgeries. Rachel emerges from the farmhouse with her own coffee and the kind of satisfied expression that suggests she's also enjoying the peaceful resolution to our neighborhood drama. "Remember when our biggest worry was choosing paint colors?" she asks, while settling into the chair next to mine. I have to admit that Laura taught everyone a valuable lesson about verifying authority claims before paying money to people who demand compliance with rules they can't properly document. "Your engineer brain saved dozens of families from fraud," Rachel continues, which feels like an overstatement, but probably isn't when you consider the broader impact of exposing Laura's operation before it expanded further. The legacy impact of Laura's exposure has spread far beyond our immediate community in ways that continue to surprise me. Illegal has become a neighborhood code phrase for unreasonable authority claims, usually delivered with the kind of humorous tone that suggests people understand the reference and appreciate the lesson. Multiple HOAs throughout the region have implemented board verification procedures that make it much harder for fake officials to operate. Consumer protection agencies now use Laura's case in fraud education programs that teach people about authority verification and document authentication. Local law enforcement has developed training programs for officers about recognizing staged evidence, helping them identify fake authority claims before victims lose money. My anniversary social media post feels like the right way to mark the end of this strange chapter in our lives. I upload a photo of the farmhouse with the caption, "1 year later, still my dream home. Still not in HOA. Laura still attending fraud prevention classes instead of pretending to be president." The comments fill up with support and jokes that show how the story has become part of local folklore in the best possible way. The post gets shared widely enough to remind people about authority verification and fraud prevention, turning our neighborhood drama into ongoing public education. The final resolution of the mysterious photo mystery came through detective work that revealed connections I never expected. The photograph turned out to be from another victim in a different state who had been tracking Laura's operation across multiple communities for months. Laura's fraud network was actually bigger than anyone initially realized, involving coordination with similar scammers in 3 different states who shared techniques and target lists. But the viral exposure of her meltdown led to arrests and prosecutions that effectively dismantled the entire network, protecting thousands of potential victims from similar fraud schemes. Looking back on this entire experience, I realized the best outcome wasn't Laura's destruction, but community education that will protect people for years to come. Her downfall became a cautionary tale that's probably saved more money than she ever stole. And the fraud prevention systems we implemented because of her scheme will protect future residents from similar scams. Thanks, Laura. You taught our community about fraud prevention and authority verification. It just costs you $7,300 and a criminal record to do it. Thanks, Laura. You taught our community about fraud prevention and authority verification. It just costs you $7,300 and a criminal record to do it. That's how justice works when entitled neighbors meet people who actually verify facts. If this story of suburban karma served cold made you smile, hit that like button. Echo Stories brings you real drama with real consequences. Until next time, remember to always verify before you trust, and we'll see you in the next unbelievable story.